What would you do if your own daughter showed up at midnight, smiling while demanding $500,000 before sunrise? I remember that night in Charleston like it happened yesterday. The clock on the mantel read 11:47 p.m. When the doorbell rang, three sharp chimes that cut through the silence of Magnolia Point Estate. Outside under the warm porch light stood my daughter Lena Langston and her husband Ryan Mercer, dressed like they'd just left a dinner party, faces painted with concern and desperation. Their words were honeyed, their eyes cold. I had raised Lena to be kind, but life and perhaps my own indulgence had turned kindness into currency. That night she came not for advice, not for comfort, but for $1,000 by noon. Ryan did most of the talking. He leaned on the doorframe like he owned it, explaining a temporary investment issue, a few bad partners, and an urgent deadline. I listened quietly the way old men do when they already know how the story ends. My daughter's hand rested on his arm. She nodded at the right moments, tears rehearsed and perfectly timed. Family drama at its finest, betrayal wrapped in silk. They called it a favor. I called it a transaction disguised as love. I could smell the fear under their perfume, the kind that comes when people realize the well might finally run dry. Ryan's tone softened. "Dad, you've always taken care of us," he said, voice dripping with confidence. And then Lena whispered the line that sliced through everything I once believed. "Please, Daddy, just this one last time." Inside me, something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. For years, I thought generosity was love. But that night, I understood kindness without boundaries is a slow suicide. So I smiled. I told them what they wanted to hear. "Fine," I said, calm as the ocean before a storm. "You'll have it. By noon." Their relief was instant, the kind of smile people give when they think they've won. They left my house with fake gratitude and real greed, believing I was still the same old man, still the open wallet they could manipulate. But that night, as their car disappeared down the long driveway, I stood in the dark and whispered to myself, "Love has a sound, and tonight it sounds like business." That's when I made a decision. No shouting, no courtroom, no chaos. Just silence. The kind of silence that rearranges destinies. In the hours that followed, I planned everything. Not revenge in the traditional sense, not the Hollywood kind, but something colder, cleaner. A justice that didn't need witnesses, hashtags, or applause. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a scream, it's the moment you stop answering the door. They came back the next morning, as if the night before had been nothing more than a friendly misunderstanding. The Charleston sun was already bleeding through the lace curtains, warming the marble of Magnolia Point Estate with a false sense of peace. Lena Langston, my daughter, stood in the kitchen, wearing a pale blue dress that made her look almost innocent again. Ryan Mercer sat beside her, flipping through his phone, pretending to read emails. On the counter, she'd placed a tray of pastries and 2 cups of coffee. It looked like love smelled like home, but I knew it wasn't either. "Morning, Dad," she said the word dad, carrying that sugar-coated tone she used when she wanted something. "We didn't mean to overwhelm you last night. You know how stressed we've been with the market crash." I nodded. Markets crash. People do too. Ryan chuckled, that hollow laugh that only men who lie for a living perfect. "You always had a way with words, Mr. Langston, but we'll get through this right, family always does." Family. That word echoed inside my chest like an insult dressed in politeness. For years, they'd used it as a key to unlock accounts, houses, favors, excuses. Every apology came with an invoice. Every "I love you" was followed by a deposit slip. And now here they were again, weaponizing affection. As they talked about urgent debt-limited opportunities and new beginnings, I sat back and studied them like a detective rewatching old footage of a crime he failed to solve. Lena's eyes darted toward the window when I didn't respond. Ryan's smile faltered when I didn't reassure him. Silence has a weight. That morning it filled the room until even the air felt heavy. "Dad," Lena said again, her voice smaller now. "You always said we're stronger together." "I did," I replied. "But I was talking about love, not leverage." Her lips trembled, not from guilt, but from frustration. She wasn't used to me speaking like that. I'd always been predictable, the father who'd step in, fix everything, pay quietly, and never ask questions. That was my greatest mistake. I confused rescuing with loving. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the counter, the alpha act slipping through his charm. "We're not asking for a gift, sir. We'll pay you back." "You have my word." I looked at him and smiled. Your word doesn't cover interest. His jaw tightened, and for the first time he dropped the polite mask. We can't afford to wait, Edward. If we don't get that wire before noon, everything collapses. There it was, the tone, the threat, the quiet kind that hides behind manners. It wasn't a request anymore. It was an ultimatum. Lena glanced at him nervously, but she didn't stop him. That told me everything. She'd chosen him over truth, over me, over herself. I rose from my chair, slowly letting the sound of it scraping the tiles stretch across the silence. You'll have what you need, I said softly. By noon, their relief flooded the room like cheap perfume. Ryan stood grinning, extending his hand. I didn't take it. Lena came around the counter and hugged me, the kind of hug that's all arms and no soul. Her tears dampened my shoulder as she whispered, Thank you, Daddy. We love you so much. Love, the most overused currency in the world. When they left, I stood at the window watching their car disappear down the oak-lined driveway. The same driveway I'd paved 20 years ago when I thought building comfort was the same as building family. Back then, I didn't realize that some people don't want stability. They want access. As the sound of their engine faded, my mind replayed memories I had spent decades trying to preserve. Lena at 12 asking me to stay up and help her with science projects. Lena at 21 calling from college crying because she'd overdrafted her account. Me paying off that $42,000 in loans like it was proof of my devotion. I used to tell myself I was protecting her, but now I knew I'd only been delaying her consequences. Betrayal rarely happens in a single moment. It's a slow leak of trust. I walked into my study, sat in the leather chair that had carried the weight of my mistakes for years, and opened the old financial ledger where I tracked every loan, every gift, every transfer to Lena and Ryan. It was a museum of misplaced love. $1, $200 for an apartment deposit, $28,000 for a car, $95,000 for a failed startup Ryan swore would change the industry, and then the biggest one, $2.8 million over 12 years in bailouts, business rescues, and emotional ransoms. Every figure had a memory attached. Every memory had a wound. That's when I realized something chilling. They didn't see me as a father anymore. They saw me as infrastructure, a system that provided comfort on demand. I wasn't a man, I was a safety net. So that morning, while they planned their next move, I planned mine. Not with anger, but precision. Revenge isn't about hurting someone, it's about restoring balance. I brewed a fresh cup of black coffee, watched the sunlight spill across the mahogany desk, and made my choice. No screaming, no confrontation, just control. If they wanted $500, $1,000 by noon, they'd get something far more valuable, the truth. Because sometimes the most powerful act of revenge is letting people taste the consequences they've always made you swallow. And as I folded the last page of the ledger closed, I whispered to myself, not as a father, but as a man finally awake. They taught me what betrayal sounds like. Now it's my turn to teach them what silence can do. The house was too quiet after they left. Not peaceful, just hollow like a church after the prayers have stopped. I sat there in the fading morning light, the faint smell of Lena's perfume still clinging to the air. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel everything I had buried beneath responsibility. When you spend your life providing people mistake it for endless strength, they forget that fathers break too, only quieter. I poured myself a bourbon, the 25-year-old Macallan, that I'd been saving for something special. I guess the end of self-delusion counted. The amber liquid burned in my throat, clearing the fog of confusion that had wrapped around me since the night before. $500, $1,000. $500,000 delivered like an invoice for fatherhood. I laughed, not out of humor, but the bitter kind of laughter that escapes when you realize the punchline is your life. I looked around my study, the walls lined with photos, trophies, memories of a man who had done everything right and thus still lost everything that mattered. On the mantle, a picture of Lena at 6 holding a sparkler in the backyard, her smile pure sunlight. Another of her high school graduation, my arm around her shoulders, both of us crying. The one from her wedding, though, that one hurt the most. The joy in her face back then wasn't for me. It was for the future she thought Ryan would give her, a future I ended up paying for. I used to believe money could fix anything, that success was armor against pain. When her mother Margaret left, I promised myself Lena would never feel that kind of loss. So I overcompensated. Every tear with a new toy, every heartbreak with a vacation, every mistake with a bailout. I didn't raise a daughter, I raised a customer. And in doing so, I sold her the idea that love came with a transaction receipt. The realization hit me like cold water, sharp, clean, undeniable. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a father and started being a financier of her comfort. I had taught her to expect, not to earn. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes, letting the silence speak truths I'd avoided for decades. That's when the memories began to roll in slow, cinematic cruel. I remembered Lena at 10 trying to bake cookies for her class. She burned half the batch, cried, and I drove to the store at midnight to buy replacements. She took them to school the next day smiling, telling everyone she'd made them herself. I never corrected her. At 23, she totaled her car texting drunk the night after her engagement party. I wrote a check, paid off the police report, and told her it was a lesson. But the only lesson she learned was that I'd always clean up her mess. Even her wedding was a test of my weakness. Ryan's family couldn't afford the venue she wanted, the Four Seasons on the Battery overlooking the water, so I paid for it. $112,000 for a day of pretending everything was perfect. That day when I walked her down the aisle, she whispered, "Don't cry, Dad. You'll ruin your suit." I thought it was a joke. Now I think it was a prophecy. Because in her world, emotion was an inconvenience and money was love. The bourbon glass felt heavy in my hand, like a confession I couldn't finish. Outside, the Charleston breeze rattled the magnolia trees. Inside, the air conditioning hummed the only heartbeat the house seemed to have left. I took a deep breath and said out loud to no one in particular, "I made her this way." It wasn't self-pity. It was fact. For years, I'd been so afraid of losing her affection that I'd bought it in installments. But love you can buy is love that will eventually demand a refund. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm, dangerously calm. The kind of calm that precedes storms. My mind, once foggy with guilt, began to clear. Patterns emerged. Lies I'd ignored now connected like constellations. Her sudden visits, the vague business deals, the emotional blackmail disguised as family bonding. All of it a script she'd perfected. That's when something inside me, the version of me that still wanted to be loved, finally died. In its place grew something sharper: resolve. I wasn't going to yell, threaten, or beg. Those were tools of powerless men. My revenge would be quiet or surgical. A scalpel, not a hammer. I walked through the house, touching the edges of furniture I'd bought, the walls I'd painted, the life I'd built. Each object told a story. The dining table where Lena once did her homework, now the table where she and Ryan had spread out contracts to manipulate me. The pool where I'd taught her to swim, now a mirror reflecting betrayal. Even the grand piano in the foyer, silent, dusty, reminded me of the nights she'd played while I signed checks in my office, thinking that was parenting. But buried under all that pain was something purer, a flicker of the father I used to be. The one who taught her to ride a bike, who stayed up late watching fireworks, who carried her to bed when she fell asleep on the couch. That version of me still existed. He was tired, but he wasn't gone. I realized then that revenge wasn't about punishing her. It was about resurrecting myself. I took another sip of bourbon and looked out at the horizon. The ocean shimmered in the distance, endless, detached, free. I envied it. Maybe that's why I chose silence. The ocean never explains itself. It just moves relentlessly, reshaping the shore until the world adapts. That would be me now. No shouting, no more saving, just action. Quiet, methodical, final. I didn't know it yet, but that morning marked the death of the old Edward Langston and the birth of someone new, someone capable of letting go, not out of hate, but out of clarity. And as the clock struck 10, I whispered a single promise to myself, not of vengeance, but of liberation. She took my money, my peace, and my trust, but she will never take my silence again. Because silence, once it becomes deliberate, isn't weakness, it's power. And this time it was mine. By the time the clock struck noon, the same hour Lena and Ryan expected their miracle, my house had already become the stage for a different kind of performance, one where the script was mine and every scene was designed to end in revelation. I didn't start with anger, I started with paperwork. That's where all real wars begin in America. My study had always been my sanctuary, but that morning it transformed into a command center. I opened the safe behind the oil painting of Charleston Harbor and pulled out the thick folders labeled with dates, initials, and transaction notes. Years of meticulous record keeping, every loan, every check, every transfer now became my arsenal. Betrayal doesn't start with a knife. It starts with signatures. There it was, $847,000 in documented help. Spreadsheets, email, confirmations, wire receipts, even screenshots of Lena's Instagram posts bragging about new jewelry trips to Napa designer bags, dinners at Uchi, all during the same months she claimed they were barely making it. I printed each one, sliding them neatly into labeled folders. I wasn't preparing for confrontation. I was preparing for proof. When you've been manipulated long enough, truth becomes your only weapon. By 12:30 p.m., I had already called James Whitaker, my attorney of 20 years, a man who had handled every property deed trust and company transfer I'd ever made. He answered on the second ring. "They finally crossed the line, didn't they?" he said without surprise. "They want $500,000, I replied. James exhaled the kind of sigh reserved for doctors who've seen the same wound reopened too many times. "I told you this day would come. You ready to let them fall, not fall," I corrected. "Just learn gravity." He chuckled darkly. "Then I'll have the papers ready." By 3 o'clock, James had filed the property transfer, the legal shift that quietly placed Lena's house, the same one I'd helped buy 3 years ago, fully under my name. She'd signed the original deed without reading past page 2, trusting me like she always did when the ink came with affection. I'd kept that oversight sealed not as leverage but as insurance. Now it was justice. Next, I moved on to financial lockdown. With James's guidance, I froze every joint account linked to my name, 6 in total. Credit cards, trust disbursements, and auto payments all suspended. I made one exception: the children's tuition at St. Andrews. I wasn't punishing them. This wasn't vengeance on innocence. This was a lesson for the guilty. As the sun dipped lower, my migraine finally subsided, replaced by a focused stillness, the kind that comes when a man stops reacting and starts engineering consequences. By 5, the lawyers had delivered the final pieces, legal notices prepared months earlier just in case. The envelopes were thick-sealed and waiting for morning delivery. Each one contained a certified statement of debt acknowledgement signed by Lena and Ryan, a notice of repossession for the Westlake property, a printed transcript of their own recorded conversation from the night before, my home security cameras catching every manipulative word. Ryan's smug, "They'll ruin your reputation at the country club," would sound very different when played back in court. At 6, I made a second call, this one to Margaret, my ex-wife. She picked up immediately, her tone unsurprised, almost relieved. "Are you really doing it, Edward?" "Yes," I said. "You were right all along. About Lena. About us. About what love turns into when it's never challenged." There was a pause, long, quiet, familiar. Then she said, "I'll help James with documentation. You handle the escape." Escape. You've been living in a prison of obligation for 20 years. It's time you left the cell unlocked. That night I began packing. Not like a fugitive, like a man relocating his peace. 2 suitcases, 1 carry-on, documents, medications, my father's fountain pen, and a single photo of Lena when she was still pure light. I didn't hate her, I pitied her, because what she thought was manipulation was actually dependence. At 10:00 p.m., I sat at the kitchen table composing the final piece of my plan, the box, an ordinary Amazon package taped neatly addressed to Lena and Ryan Mercer. Inside, I arranged everything with the precision of a surgeon. On top, the property deed showing that the Westlake home was mine. Beneath that, a spreadsheet listing every dollar they owed. Below it, a USB drive with security footage, their own words, their threats, their smiles when they thought they had won. And finally, a note written in my cleanest penmanship. "You wanted the money by noon? Here's what you were really worth." I placed it on the porch table where the doorbell camera would capture every second of discovery. At midnight, I finalized my flight to Lisbon, 6:45 a.m., departure first class, seat 2A. My attorney would handle everything stateside. The dealership operations would transfer temporarily to Jake, my general manager. I typed a single-sentence email: "Family emergency, you're in charge until further notice." Before going to bed, I walked through each room of the house, turning off lights one by one, not because I was saving electricity, but because I was closing chapters. The dining room where birthdays had once filled the air with laughter, dark. The living room where Lena once sang along to Christmas songs, dark. The study where I signed checks that paid for her, lies, dark. When I reached her childhood room, I paused. It had long been converted into a guest office, but on the top shelf still sat her old ballet shoes, tiny and frayed. I held them in my hand, the leather soft from use, the ribbons discolored with time. She had been good, graceful even. I wondered if she still remembered that little girl. I left the shoes in the box too. By 4:30 a.m., my alarm buzzed. No hesitation. I showered, dressed in a navy blazer, and poured one last cup of coffee. As I sipped, I watched the security feed on my laptop, 4 cameras displaying the same quiet home I was leaving behind. On the screen, the porch light glowed over the small box, waiting patiently for noon. It wasn't money, it was a mirror. At 5:15, I called James. "Everything's in motion," I said. "Good. You'll be wheels up before they even wake. Tell Margaret the house keys are in the safe. Combination's the same." "Will do." And Edward, yes, enjoy the silence. You've earned it. As I stepped out into the dawn air, suitcase in hand, the magnolia trees swayed gently in the early wind. The sky over Charleston was painted in gold and gray, that sacred space between endings and beginnings. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into the life I should have lived all along, one without debt noise or emotional blackmail. And somewhere deep inside me, a voice whispered, almost proud, "Let them open the box. Let truth be the payment they never wanted." Because in the end, justice doesn't always come from courts or vengeance. Sometimes it arrives in a cardboard box delivered right on time. The clock struck 12. Not just any noon, their noon. The one they had chosen as the deadline for my obedience. The hour when they expected money, power, and control to once again bend to their will. But this time the transaction would not go as planned. At 12:02 p.m., the front gate camera blinked to life. The sleek white Tesla glided up the driveway, the same one I'd helped them lease when their credit couldn't stretch far enough. Its electric hum was almost poetic, the sound of arrogance arriving on time. Lena was driving oversized sunglasses, hiding the eyes that had once looked up to me with trust. Ryan sat beside her, jaw clenched, scrolling his phone, the perpetual gambler, calculating odds even when the game was already lost. They didn't knock right away. First, Lena fixed her lipstick in the rearview mirror. Ryan checked his reflection, straightened his cufflinks, and adjusted the smugness in his posture. They were preparing for victory. The doorbell rang, once a polite announcement of conquest. Then again, sharper, impatient. But the house was empty. From my hotel room in Lisbon, hours and continents away, I watched everything unfold through the security feed James had synced to my private server. 4 cameras, 4 angles, the perfect stage for truth. Lena fidgeted, pressing the bell again. "He's here somewhere," she said, scanning the windows. "He wouldn't leave without paying. He's too predictable." Ryan chuckled, that familiar arrogance bubbling under his tone. "Maybe he's getting the cash himself. Old man probably didn't trust online transfers." Then he saw it. The box. A plain Amazon package sitting on the porch table, neat, unassuming, just like me when they underestimated me. Ryan picked it up, reading the black Sharpie handwriting on top, Lena and Ryan Mercer, deliverable noon. He smirked. "See, told you he'd cave." Probably some sentimental note and a check. Lena's hand trembled as she reached for the tape. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, but her tone betrayed excitement. She was about to receive what she thought was proof of power. The box tore open with a sound that would echo in my memory forever. First came the documents. The deed to their Westlake home, signed and notarized, my name listed as the rightful owner. Lena's eyes widened, disbelief crawling up her face like frost. "No, that can't be right. This is a mistake." Ryan snatched the paper from her. His expression changed faster than I'd ever seen, confusion to shock, then rage. "What the hell is this?" Next, the spreadsheet. Every transaction, every wire, every favor they'd ever begged for, $1.3 million, documented with timestamps, notes, and signatures. Beside each entry, a brief description: car loan, wedding, down payment, emergency investment. The math was merciless. This is insane," Lena stammered, voice cracking. "He's keeping score like we're criminals." Ryan's voice exploded. "He's setting us up." Then the photographs, glossy prints of Ryan's nights at the casino, the time-stamped evidence of his business trips. The camera had caught him slumped over a blackjack table, eyes bloodshot, chips gone. Another showed him arguing with a pit boss, hands waving in panic. The final one, him handing over a Rolex to cover a bet. Lena gasped, the sound raw, unfiltered. "You told me the money was for a real estate deal," Ryan snapped back. "It was until things changed." His voice cracked under pressure. Then came the USB drive. Ryan, frustrated, plugged it into his phone using an adapter from his briefcase. Irony at its finest. The audio began to play. Lena's voice, first soft and manipulative. "Just act confident, Ryan. He's too pathetic to say no. He always gives in if I start crying." Then Ryan's reply, smug and chilling. "These aren't bank people, Lena. They're serious individuals. He pays or we have a problem." The recording ended with my voice calm, resigned, a single sentence that would haunt them forever. "You'll have it by noon." Silence followed. Not the kind that soothes, the kind that suffocates. Ryan dropped the phone. It hit the porch with a sharp crack echoing through the quiet neighborhood. His hands shook as he looked around like the air itself was betraying him. "What? What did he do?" Lena whispered, eyes wide and wet. "Why would he?" And then the prenup. Highlighted in yellow, Section 47 gambling clause. Violation threshold $50 US. Consequence, immediate forfeiture of marital assets. Ryan's face drained of color. "That bastard lawyer," he muttered. "He set me up." "No," Lena said, her voice breaking. "My father set us both up." At that exact moment, a soft chime from her phone broke the silence. Her first credit card decline, then another and another. The familiar brands: Chase, American Express, Nordstrom. Each notification a digital guillotine. Ryan grabbed his phone, frantically scrolling. They're all frozen, every account, even the trust fund. Lena's knees buckled, her designer heels scraping against the porch tile as she collapsed onto the steps. "He can't do this to me," she sobbed, mascara streaking down her face like ink on a ruined painting. "He's my father, Mrs. Chen." My elderly neighbor, 4'11", of unshakable composure, appeared at the edge of the screen. She held up her phone, filming, her voice steady. "You need to leave. This property belongs to Mr. Langston. He sent me the notice this morning." Ryan turned, fury replacing fear. "Turn that off, lady. I already sent it to his lawyer," she replied. "For safety." Ryan's shoulders slumped, rage replaced by the dull weight of inevitability. He hurled his briefcase at the door. The handle snapped. Papers flew across the porch, fragments of entitlement fluttering away like ashes. Lena stayed there motionless, clutching the USB drive like it was a weapon that had backfired. Her sobs turned to silence. Then with trembling hands she whispered, "He didn't just leave. He erased us." Mrs. Chen stood unmoved. "No, dear," she said softly. He finally remembered who he was. At 12:30 p.m., their Tesla screeched away from the driveway. The cameras followed the taillights until they disappeared beyond the magnolia trees. Across the ocean, in a quiet cafe overlooking the Tagus River, I watched the final seconds of the footage. The espresso in my hand had gone cold, but the peace in my chest burned warm. People think revenge is loud gunfire shouting courtroom drama. They're wrong. Real revenge is silent. It's precision. It's timing. It's leaving behind the evidence of your own endurance. I closed my laptop, the screen fading to black. On the table beside it lay my passport, a one-way ticket, and a folded note I'd written to myself the night before. When love becomes debt, payment must come due. The box was opened. The truth was delivered. And for the first time in 20 years, I was free. By the time the Atlantic sun rose over Lisbon the next morning, the lives of Lena and Ryan Mercer were already unraveling, with the precision of a thread pulled from an expensive suit. Every detail I had set in motion before leaving Charleston began to unfold, not through rage or revenge, but through inevitability. Actions have consequences, and theirs had finally arrived on schedule. James sent me his first update just after sunrise. His tone was clinical, but the undercurrent of grim satisfaction was impossible to miss. "Edward," he said, "it's done. The house transfer has cleared, the locks have been changed, and the accounts are sealed. By the time they wake, the only thing left in their name is regret." Regret. Such a small word for such a massive fall. From the recordings, I later pieced together what happened next. The moment after their humiliation on my porch, Lena had called her bank in tears, demanding explanations for the frozen accounts. The banker, polite, detached, informed her that the primary account holder had enacted protective measures. That phrase so sterile broke her. She screamed, then begged. But money moves faster than emotion, and the system had already obeyed my final instruction. Ryan, on the other hand, responded with fury, not fear. He stormed into the Velvet Room Casino that same night, the same den of losses that had drained $500,000 from my savings through his manipulation. The security footage, which James later obtained, showed him slamming his hands on the poker table, demanding credit. The pit boss shook his head. Without assets, Ryan Mercer was just another man with expensive habits and no collateral. By 2:00 a.m., they were officially broke. The next 48 hours became a tragic carousel of denial, anger, and desperation. Lena tried calling my office. Jake, my manager, ignored every attempt as instructed. She showed up in person on Monday, hysterical, claiming I was being manipulated, coerced, perhaps even held hostage. Jake, ever composed, handed her a copy of the notarized deed showing the property transfer. "Mr. Langston made these arrangements months ago," he said. "He's free to live however he chooses." Her face reportedly went pale. That was the first time she realized she no longer had control. The neighbors noticed the shift almost immediately. Mrs. Chen, who had witnessed the porch incident, called James to report that movers had appeared at the Westlake home, not to move furniture in but out. The Mercers' belongings were stacked in the driveway, like trophies of bad decisions. The eviction notice was already pinned to the door. Ryan's luxury watches, Lena's designer handbags, the framed photographs of their perfect family, all scattered under the unforgiving Texas sun. James documented everything for legal closure. "They're fighting," he said in his report. "She blames him for the gambling. He blames her for manipulation. They both blame you for ending the game. But I hadn't ended the game. I'd simply refused to play." Lena's social media accounts went silent within days. Then came the whispers, screenshots of her meltdown spreading through Charleston's country club circles. Her carefully curated world of filters and brunch photos dissolved into gossip. She said her father disappeared, one post read. Some say he left her a box of proof. Another comment below it. "Maybe that's what love looks like when it wakes up." Ryan's spiral was faster, uglier. The loan sharks, the serious individuals he once bragged about, came knocking. The same men whose patience he had gambled away. James's contacts at the Charleston Police Department confirmed that a complaint had been filed, harassment threats and property damage. They wanted their $500 or $1,000 back, and Ryan had nothing left to sell. Not even his integrity. By the end of that week, Lena had moved back into her old condo, the one she once called too small for my lifestyle. The irony was poetic. Her new life consisted of boxed leftovers, unpaid bills, and silence. But silence, I hoped, might teach her something. Meanwhile, in Lisbon, I found myself adjusting to peace like an old man learning to breathe again. The days were slow, deliberate. I'd wake early, walk along the riverfront, and watch the street artists paint in the morning light. The air carried a kind of music that didn't demand attention, the opposite of the noise I'd lived with for decades. Margaret called every evening. "She's crumbling," she said softly. "You should see the news feed. She's blaming herself now." "I don't want her destroyed," I told her. "Just awakened." "Sometimes awakening feels like destruction," Margaret replied. "You know that." She was right. I did. By the second week, Lena stopped calling anyone. Even Ryan had vanished, the last trace of him, a pawn shop receipt for his wedding ring. That somehow hit me harder than I expected. Not because I cared for him, but because it was the final symbol of how little he'd ever understood value. To him, everything had a price. To me, everything had finally gained meaning. Then a letter arrived, not from her directly, but through James. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. "Dad, I don't understand why you did it this way, why you had to humiliate us. But after everything that's happened, I think maybe you were right. I don't even know who I was pretending to be anymore. I just wish you'd told me you were leaving instead of letting me find out through the mess you left behind." I read it 3 times before folding it carefully into my journal. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a beginning, a crack in the armor of entitlement. 3 months later, James sent another update. Lena was working part-time at a department store, learning to live paycheck to paycheck. "She's not angry anymore," he said. "Just quiet, quiet." There was that word again. The truth had done its work. The silence had filled its purpose. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It echoes soft, steady, relentless. I didn't need to see her suffer. I needed her to see herself. And that in the end was exactly what happened. I spent my days by the sea teaching English to local children, drinking coffee at small cafes and painting on Sundays, badly but joyfully. I didn't check the news or my business accounts. Jake sent monthly summaries, all reading the same profits up. No problems. My heart rate was lower, my sleep deeper, my guilt quieter. For decades, I thought being a father meant protecting your child from pain. Now I understood real love sometimes means letting them feel it. And though I knew she still hated me in moments, I also knew that someday when the noise stopped and the silence settled, Lena would realize the same truth I had discovered too late. Betrayal breaks, illusions, but it also rebuilds character. And that's the justice no courtroom, no check, and no apology could ever deliver. 6 months passed before I heard her name again. 6 months of sunrises over Lisbon, of quiet breakfasts, of learning how to live without looking over my shoulder for the next emotional ambush. I'd grown used to the rhythm of silence, to waking up with no notifications, no demands, no guilt in my throat. But peace has a strange way of testing itself. It never stays untouched for long. That morning I found a small envelope tucked beneath the door of my rented flat in Barro Alto. No return address. The handwriting, careful but uncertain, was one I hadn't seen since she was 15, when she still wrote me birthday cards in pink ink. Lena. For a long time I didn't open it. I made coffee instead, black, no sugar. I sat by the window watching fishermen along the Tagus River, each one casting their line into the patient water. I wondered if forgiveness worked the same way, casting hope into silence, not knowing if anything would bite. When I finally tore the envelope open, the paper smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent Margaret used to wear. The first line stopped me cold. I don't know how to start a letter to someone I destroyed. I exhaled slowly, the weight of her words anchoring me back into memories I thought I had buried for good. The first months after you left were hell, not because of the money that went faster than I expected, but because I couldn't understand why you did it. I kept asking myself, what kind of father would disappear without saying goodbye? I called you every name I could think of, but eventually the noise ran out. I stopped shouting when I realized you weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to teach me. She wrote about her job at the department store, how she'd learned the weight of each dollar she once spent without thinking, about the nights she cried in the break room because a customer yelled at her, and how that humiliation felt eerily familiar, like a mirror held up to the way she used to treat me. I used to think money solved everything. Now I see it only hides the cracks. You built a life for me out of sacrifice, and I mistook it for obligation. I turned love into leverage. I hate who I became, but I'm learning how to start over. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know. I finally see the difference between what you gave me and what I took. The words blurred as my eyes stung, not from pain, but something gentler. Something like relief. I read the letter again that night, and again the next morning. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my leather journal beside the first one she sent months earlier. Together they formed something fragile, a bridge not built by apologies, but by accountability. I didn't write back immediately. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't a response. It's a process. So instead I sent a postcard. Nothing dramatic. Just a picture of the Lisbon waterfront at sunset with one sentence written on the back. Peace begins when blame ends. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was longer, steadier, more grounded. She'd started volunteering at a community shelter for women rebuilding their lives after financial and emotional abuse. She wrote that helping others felt like the only way to repay the debt she owed to herself and to me. I met a woman yesterday whose son won't speak to her. She said she wished she could go back and do everything differently. I told her she can't, but she can start behaving differently now. And as I said it, I realized I was talking about us. Those words, behaving differently now, stayed with me. They were quiet, but they rang louder than any apology could. Because remorse without action is performance. But Lena was acting, working, saving, giving. She was rebuilding her life one shift, 1 hour, one scar at a time. In January, James sent me a message she's made her final repayment. Every cent. It wasn't required. I had never demanded it. But she did it anyway, $50 a week from a retail paycheck until every debt I had documented was cleared. She even made a donation James added to the Senior Legal Defense Fund in your name. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. The next month I arranged something without telling her. I asked James to transfer ownership of the small lake cabin in North Carolina, the one Margaret and I used to take her to every summer, back into Lena's name. Not as inheritance, not as pity, as closure. I left a note in the deed envelope for when you're ready to remember who you were before the noise. I didn't hear back for weeks. Until one evening as I sat in a Lisbon cafe reading the Diario de Noticias, the waiter brought me a small parcel, international postage, Charleston origin. Inside was a frame photo, the lake cabin at sunrise. In the corner, Lena's handwriting. I went back. It's still beautiful. I'm trying to be too. That night I walked along the river until the city lights blurred into the water. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a slow version of Fly Me to the Moon. For the first time I realized forgiveness doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it's just the quiet exchange of recognition, a mutual surrender of pride. Lena and I didn't reconcile the way movies show it. There were no hugs, no tears, no dramatic airport reunion. We simply began existing in the same world again, one letter, one memory, one shared silence at a time. Months later, she wrote me her final message, or maybe it was her first real one. Dad, I used to think silence was punishment. Now I know it's where love learns to breathe again. Thank you for letting me find that out the hard way. I placed her words beside my morning coffee, reading them slowly, like a prayer I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Because in the end, forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives quietly, patiently, when both people finally stop trying to win. And as I watched the Lisbon sunrise stretch across the sky, I whispered more to myself than to her. You learned the truth, Lena. That's all I ever wanted. Then I smiled, not the proud smile of a man who'd won, but the soft, tired one of a father who had finally been heard. It happened almost a year to the day since I left Charleston. The morning air in Lisbon carried that familiar hush before the city wakes, the kind of silence I'd grown to call home. I was sitting at my favorite cafe overlooking the Tagus River when I saw her. Lena. She stood across the street, hesitant hands clasped together like a child about to confess. No makeup, no designer coat, just jeans, a soft sweater, and eyes that no longer looked like polished mirrors but open windows. For a moment I wondered if she'd turn back. Instead, she crossed the street slowly, as if every step was an apology. Hi, Dad, she said quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. That simple greeting carried more honesty than 1,000 apologies. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. She sat down. No tears, no speeches, just a deep shared breath between two people who had finally stopped pretending. We talked about small things first, the weather, the sea, the bread at the cafe, then the heavier things, her new job, the women she helped at the shelter, the nights she still woke up hating herself. I listened without interruption because, for the first time, she wasn't speaking to be forgiven. She was speaking to be understood. When she finally asked, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. No, I said softly. I hated who I let you become, but I love who you're becoming now. She cried then, quietly, like someone releasing years of guilt. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just let the silence hold us the way words never could. After a while, she reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they brushed mine. You were right, she whispered. Money isn't power. Peace is. And I smiled because she had said out loud what had taken me a lifetime to learn. That day, as the sunlight spilled across the water, I realized something. Revenge had never been the goal. The real victory was reclaiming peace, the right to exist without apology, without fear, without needing to prove my worth. When I left Charleston, I thought I was ending a story. But sitting there watching my daughter rediscover her humanity, I knew I'd simply rewritten it. Because true justice isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their darkness decide who you become. And that's what I want you to remember. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood or silenced by the ones you love most, your peace is your power. Your dignity is your revenge. Don't chase validation from those who broke you. Rebuild yourself in silence until they no longer recognize the person who walked away. If this story reached you, if it made you think of your own family, your own moments of quiet strength, Leave a comment below and tell me what peace means to you. If you believe in second chances, in calm over chaos, in the kind of power that doesn't need to shout, save this video, share it, and subscribe for more stories that heal in silence. Because somewhere out there, another person is learning that the loudest revenge in the world is this simple truth. You don't need to win the fight when you've already won your peace.